They called her a fool, and this time it was the county clerk who said it, 62 years old and stubborn as a fence post. When Marisol Vane laid her last $4 on his desk in Alder Fork, Colorado, in the flat gray autumn of 1893. She was 53, a widow twice bereaved, turned out of the boarding room she had scrubbed floors to keep because the mine had closed and the wages with it, and there was nothing left of her but a carpetbag, a good coat gone thin at the elbows, and those $4 folded small as a secret. The men on the courthouse steps had laughed when they heard what she wanted the old schoolhouse at the edge of town, boarded and buckling, its bell long silent, its roof caving toward the desks like a mouth going slack. They let her have it free, waving the dollars away as a joke, because no one else would take a ruin that the town had written off as dead. But beneath those warped and rotten floorboards, sealed against damp and time, waited something that would not only lift Marisol Vane out of her poverty, but would give a forgotten town back its very reason to exist. Settle in, and let us tell you the story of Marisol Vane. If you are watching tonight from a place the maps have started to forget, a town the train stopped stopping in, tell us its name in the comments, because this is a story about exactly such a place, and about the woman who would not let it go quiet. She had not always been poor, though she had never been what anyone would call rich, and there is a difference the comfortable rarely trouble to learn. Marisol was born Marisol Quintero, the third daughter of a stonemason and a seamstress who had come north from Santa Fe when the railroads were still a rumor, and the high parks of Colorado were mostly wind and antelope, and the smell of pine after rain. Her father built things meant to outlast him, chimneys, wellheads, the low walls that kept a garden from the deer, and he taught his daughters that a thing built honestly was a kind of promise to the future, a letter written in stone to people you would never meet. Her mother taught them the reverse and equal art, the mending of what others discarded, how to turn a frayed collar or a moth-eaten blanket into something with years still in it, how to see in a ruined thing not its ending but its possibility. Between the two of them, Marisol grew up believing that nothing was truly finished until you had exhausted every way of saving it, and that the world was full of people too hurried or too proud to look twice at what they were throwing away. The particular gift she carried out of that small adobe house, though, was neither stone nor thread but letters. Her mother, who could barely sign her own name, had insisted the girls learn to read, trading mended shirts to a traveling preacher for lessons out of a battered primer and a Bible with half its psalms water-stained to ghosts. Marisol took to it the way other children take to running. By 12, she read aloud to the whole street on winter nights. By 16, she was writing letters for the miners and the mule drivers who could not, folding their clumsy love and their homesickness into careful lines to send across a continent. She learned that words, written down and kept, were a form of stone, too, that a page could hold a person long after the voice was gone. And she learned to keep a fair and patient hand with figures, so that when she married a quiet freighter named Tomas Vane at 22, it was Marisol who kept the accounts. Marisol, who could look at a column of numbers and see the truth a man was trying to hide inside it. They had good years, she and Tomas, though the mountains gave nothing cheaply. They lost a child young, a boy, and grieved him in the wordless way of people who must keep working to eat. And they poured what love that grief left them into the town of Alder Fork itself, which in those days was young and hopeful and growing. Tomas hauled ore and lumber in the mail. Marisol taught the town's children their letters in the front room of their cabin before there was ever a proper school, taking eggs and firewood and mended promises for pay. When the town finally built the schoolhouse in 1871, a stout square of hand-cut timber with a good stone foundation, her own father helped to lay before his hands gave out. It was Marisol Vane who rang its bell each morning for 11 years, and half the grown men and women of Alder Fork had learned to read their own names sitting at those desks under her patient eye. That, then, was who she was before the falling. A mender of ruined things, a keeper of accounts, a reader and writer of the words that hold a life together, and a woman who had helped raise a whole town out of its own illiteracy and never thought to be paid back for it. She believed, in the plain and unshowy way of people who have worked all their lives, that the town remembered. She would learn, as so many do, that towns have short memories and long fears, and that gratitude is the first thing a place lets go of when it grows afraid. The falling, when it came the way weather comes to the high country, not all at once, but in a lowering, a gray accumulation, until one morning you wake to find the whole sky sitting on your chest. First, Tomas died, thrown from the wagon seat on the ice road above Copper Bend in the winter of 1884, and Marisol buried him beside their boy and told herself she could go on because going on was the only skill grief had ever taught her. She kept teaching. She took in mending and kept books for 2 of the town's merchants and read the newspaper aloud to the old and the blind. And for a few years, the widow Vane was a fixture of Alder Fork as fixed as the mountains, thin and upright and always with ink somewhere on her fingers. Then the money came, and money is a kind of weather too. A company called Halverson and Pruitt bought up the mines and the mill and, within a season, most of the town besides. They were led in Alder Fork by a smooth, heavy man named Rufus Pruitt, who wore a gold watch chain thick as a bridle and spoke of progress the way other men speak of God. Pruitt had plans. He wanted the town tidy and modern and, above all, cheap to run. And one of the first economies he found was the little school on the edge of town, which cost the company money and returned, so far as his ledger could see, nothing at all. He built a new school nearer the company houses, a bright thing with a store-bought bell, and hired a young teacher from Denver at wages Marisol could never match. And quietly, without a vote or a word of thanks, he closed the old schoolhouse and let it be boarded up. Marisol Vane, 50 years old, found herself with no pupils, no bell to ring, and a reputation as a relic, the old woman from the old school, from the old town, from before Mr. Pruitt made everything new. The mending and the bookkeeping might have kept her yet, but here Pruitt's reach closed the last door without his ever meaning to. The merchants she kept books for sold out to the company store, which kept its own accounts in Denver. The miners who had brought her their letters were laid off by the score as the Vanes pinched out, and those who stayed could not spare a coin for mending when their own children went hungry. One by one, the small threads by which Marisol had held herself up were cut until she was living in a single rented room over the livery, eating little, burning less, and watching her few dollars dwindle like snow in March. When at last she could not make the rent, the liveryman, not cruel, only frightened, only company-owned, like everything else, put her things in the street with an apology he could not look at while he made. So it was that on a cold October afternoon, Marisol Vane came to be standing in the mud of Alder Fork, with everything she owned in one carpetbag and $4 in her fist, 53 years old, and free. In the terrible way that only those who have lost everything are free. She could have left. The stage still ran 3 times a week to the railhead, and $4 would carry her some distance from her sorrows. But when Marisol looked down the long street of the town she had helped to raise, her eye caught on the old schoolhouse at the far end, hunched and dark against the graying pines, and something in her that was pure Quintero, pure Mender, pure Mason's daughter refused to walk away from a ruin without first seeing whether it could be saved. She went that same afternoon to the county clerk, old Elias Board, and asked the price of the boarded school. Elias laughed, though not unkindly, and the men loitering on the courthouse steps laughed with him, less kind. The building was condemned, he told her. The company had deeded it back to the county to be rid of the taxes, and the county wanted only to be rid of it in turn. The roof was going. The foundation her own father laid was said to be cracked, and no sane person would pour good money into it. When she laid her $4 on his desk anyway, insisting on paying, insisting that a thing taken for nothing is a thing you never truly own, Elias pushed the money back across the wood and told her she could have the wreck for free and welcome to it, and that she was a fool to want it. Marisol thanked him with a dignity that made the laughter falter, gathered her dollars, and walked the length of the town to stand before the building she had just been given. The place where she had rung a bell for 11 years, and where the whole course of her ruined life was about to turn on a loose board and a nail that would not hold. The door had swelled in its frame, and she had to set her shoulder to it, and when it gave, she stepped into a cold that smelled of dust and mouse and old chalk, of rain that had come in where rain should not, of the particular sorrow of a room built to be full of children and left empty too long. Gray light fell through the boarded windows in blades. The desks stood in their rows under a fur of dust, and on the wall the alphabet she had painted with her own hand still marched from A to Z, faded now to the color of weak tea. She stood a long while in the doorway and let the place remember her, and let herself weep, a little, quietly, for Tomas and the boy, and the 11 years and all of it. And then, because weeping had never yet mended a roof, she rolled up her sleeves in the cold and began to take the measure of what could be saved. It was in the far corner where the water had come in worst that she found the first sign. She was on her knees, prying up a floorboard so rotten it had gone soft as bread, meaning only to see how far the damp had spread into the joists, when the board lifted whole and beneath it, in the dry dark between the beams. Her fingers touched, not earth, but iron. She cleared the dust and the dead leaves that had sifted down over years. And there, set into the good dry space above the stone foundation, was the corner of a metal box, a strongbox, Japan black, the kind the freight companies used, the kind her own Tomas had hauled by the 100 in his years on the road. Her heart went strange and quick. She pried up 2 more boards, her breath loud in the empty room, and worked the box free of its hiding place, and found it heavier than any box its size had a right to be, and locked, and stamped on its lid in letters worn but legible with the name she knew, Halverson and Pruitt, and below that, smaller, Alder Fork Miners Relief and Trust. She did not force it that night. She sat back on her heels in the failing light and looked at the box a long time, and something older in her than curiosity, something her father, the mason, had put there, told her that a thing sealed and hidden this carefully was a thing someone had meant either to protect or to bury, and that she had better understand which before she broke it open. So she wrapped the box in her spare shawl and carried it back to the corner and covered it again with the boards, and she spent that first night in the schoolhouse itself, wrapped in her coat against the cold, guarding a mystery she did not yet understand. And in the morning she began, as she had always begun with anything broken, by learning everything she could about how it had come to be that way. What she learned, over the slow, careful weeks that followed, she assembled the way she had once assembled letters for the unlettered, a word here, a name there, patience for its own sake. She got the box open at last with a mason's patience and a thin file, and inside she found not gold but paper, which to Marisol Vane was very nearly better, a bound ledger in a cramped, honest hand, a bundle of letters tied in faded ribbon, a sheaf of signed subscription cards, and at the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, a deed. The ledger, when she read it by candlelight, made her hands go cold. It was the account book of the It's Just Fund. It's just a fund. It's just fund. It's just the fund, she came to understand, that the miners themselves had built penny by penny out of their own thin wages across a dozen years, a common purse against the day when the mine took a man's leg or his lungs or his life and left his family with nothing. Every miner in the district had paid into it. The ledger listed them by name, hundreds of names, some of whom Marisol had taught to write those very names at the desks not 20 feet from where she sat. And the total at the foot of the last honest page, the sum the men of Alder Fork had saved to protect their own, was very large indeed. The letters told the rest, and the deed sealed it. The fund had been kept, in the early years, by a decent bookkeeper named Amos Kettle, an older man Marisol dimly remembered, who had died. She found his obituary folded among the papers in the same hard winter that took Tomas. And in the confusion after his death, with the fund's records missing and its trustee gone, the company had simply absorbed it. The letters, written between Rufus Pruitt and a lawyer in Denver, were careful and cold and unmistakable. They discussed the unfortunate lapse in the fund's records, the opportunity it presented, and the quiet transfer of the miners' savings into the company's general accounts to be reported, if anyone should ever ask, as lost. But Amos Kettle, it seemed, had been an honest man to the last, and a cautious one, for he had made a second true copy of everything, the ledger, the signed cards proving each man's contribution, and above all the deed, drawn up years before, that placed the fund and its money in trust, not to the company at all, but to the town of Alder Fork, held for its people unable to be sold or seized or spent for any purpose but their relief. And dying, with no one he could trust and a company already circling, old Amos Kettle had hidden the true record in the one place he was certain no company man would ever think to look, and no honest townsman would ever willfully destroy, beneath the floor of the schoolhouse. In the care, though he could not have known it, of the very woman who would one day be turned out with $4 and given that ruin for free. Marisol Vane understood then, kneeling among the scattered papers with the candle guttering, that she held in her hands not a fortune for herself, but a resurrection for a town and a weapon aimed straight at the heart of the man who had cast her out. And she understood, too, with the cold clarity of a woman who had kept honest books all her life, that the moment Rufus Pruitt learned those papers existed, he would stop at nothing to see them burned. She was right to be afraid. And she was not fool enough to be reckless. For a woman with no money, no standing, and no allies, walking into the company office with an accusation would be walking into her own erasure. Pruitt would call her a mad old widow, a thief who had forged papers to extort him. And there were plenty in the new town who would believe it, and few left with the courage to say otherwise. So Marisol did what she had always done best. She worked quietly, and she wrote things down. She copied the ledger out in her own fair hand twice, and hid the copies in two separate places, one beneath a stone in the old cemetery beside Tomas, and one sewn into the lining of her coat. She wrote out a plain accounting of what the papers proved, in language a jury of plain men could follow, and she began, carefully, a name at a time, to find the miners still living whose names were in that book. It was slow and dangerous work, and it did not stay secret long. There is no keeping a thing from a company town. And word reached Rufus Pruitt within the month that the old schoolteacher had been asking strange questions and showing an old ledger to men who used to work the copper bend seam. He came to see her himself, which told her how frightened he was, though he wore his fear as men like him always do, dressed up as concern. He found her in the cold schoolhouse with her sleeves rolled and a hammer in her hand, and he stood in the doorway blocking the light and told her, in his warm and reasonable voice, that he had heard the poor widow Vane had taken up in a condemned building, and that the company, out of Christian charity, was prepared to offer her a comfortable sum to leave Alder Fork and settle somewhere gentler on her old bones $100, he said. More money than she had seen in years, and all she need do was hand over any old rubbish she might have found in the wreck and be gone by spring. Marisol looked at the gold chain thick across his belly and thought of the miner's pennies it had been bought with, and she thanked him, and she told him she was quite comfortable, and that she had found nothing in the wreck but honest work. He did not believe her. She had not expected him to, but she had learned what she needed to know, which was that he was afraid, and that his fear had a price on it of $100, and that a man does not pay $100 to bury rubbish. After that, the pressure came the way it always comes from men who own everything, not as violence, which leaves marks, but as the slow closing of every door. The county clerk, who had given her the school, was leaned upon to find that her title was somehow defective. The company store would not sell to her. A rumor went about that the old woman had gone strange in the head and was digging up the schoolhouse looking for buried treasure that did not exist. Twice she came back to find the door forced, and the floor further torn up, though they never found the box, because she no longer kept it there. And when quiet menace did not move her, Pruitt reached for the last door, and had the county move to condemn the building outright and pull it down to make the town safe, he said, from a hazard. Though everyone understood it was Marisol he meant to pull down with it. She was given 30 days to vacate the ruin she had been laughed at for wanting, and it seemed to all of Alder Fork that the foolish widow had lost the last thing she had, and would this time surely go. But Marisol Vane had spent those weeks doing the one thing Rufus Pruitt, for all his money, could not do. She had been putting the town back together, one name at a time. Every miner she found and showed the ledger to was a man who had thought his savings simply gone, who had buried a wife's medicine or a child's schooling under the word lost, and who now learned that the money had never been lost at all but taken, and that here in an old woman's fair copperplate was the proof of it with his own name upon the line. She did not ask them for money. She had none to ask for, and none to give. She asked them for something rarer and harder. She asked them to stand up together, in the open, in daylight, and say what they knew. And because she had once taught half of them their letters, because she had written their love and their grief across a continent and never charged the poorest of them a cent, because the town's long memory had not died after all, but only gone to sleep, they came. Not all of them, but enough. The reckoning did not happen in a courtroom, though the courts would finish it later. It happened on the courthouse steps in Alder Fork on a bright, cold morning in the first week of spring, on the very stones where the men had laughed at her in the fall. The county had come to serve its condemnation, and with it, to be rid of Marisol Vane for good. And Rufus Pruitt had come to watch it done, his gold chain bright in the thin sun. But Marisol had come too, and she had not come alone. Behind her, filling the muddy street, stood better than 60 men and women of Alder Fork, the miners whose names were in the book, and their wives, and their grown children she had taught, and old Elias Board, the clerk, who had given her the school, and had lately grown ashamed of much he had signed. And when Pruitt began his smooth remarks about hazards and progress, Marisol Vane climbed 3 steps so that all could see her, and she held up the ledger, and in the clear, carrying voice she had used to ring 11 years of mornings, she read out the truth. She read the names first. She was wise enough to begin with the names, one after another, each man's own hand-signed pledge to the common fund, so that no one could pretend it was a stranger's quarrel. She read the sums each had paid, and the sum that had been saved, and the letters in which Rufus Pruitt and his Denver lawyer had agreed to call it lost. She read the deed last, the deed old Amos Kettle had hidden with his dying caution beneath the schoolhouse floor, that placed the money forever in trust to the people of Alder Fork and out of any company's reach. And when she had finished, there was a silence in that muddy street deeper than any laughter. And into it Rufus Pruitt made the mistake that finishes such men. He called her a liar and a forger and a mad old thief, loudly, before 60 people who had learned to read at her knee and who were, every one of them, at that moment reading his face. It was old Elias Board who broke it, stepping up beside her, county clerk still and shaking with more than the cold, to say that the papers were genuine, that he had checked the county rolls against the deed himself, and it was true, and that God forgive them all for the thing they had let a good woman be laughed out of town over. The rest belongs to lawyers and to time. And Marisol Vane, who had never wanted the money for herself, made sure it went where old Amos Kettle had meant it to go. The fund was restored the courts in Denver, faced with the ledger and the signed cards, and the deed and 60 sworn townsfolk could do nothing else. And every miner and widow whose name was in that book received back what had been taken. With interest, the company was made to pay for its keeping. Rufus Pruitt did not go to prison, for men with his money seldom do. But he was ruined all the same in the way that mattered most in a small place. He was known. The company recalled him to Denver and then let him go, and his gold chain and his warm, reasonable voice went out of Alder Fork forever. And the last anyone heard, he was selling insurance in a city where no one had learned to read at Marisol Vane's knee, and no one, therefore, had any particular reason to trust him. That was justice enough. She had never wished him harm. She had only wished the truth to be known, and the truth, once she had dug it out from under the floorboards, had done the rest by itself. As for the money that was hers to direct for the deed named a trustee, and the town, in a meeting that half wept and half cheered, named Marisol Vane, she spent not $1 of it on her own comfort beyond a warm room and coal enough to see out her winters. She used the miners' fund to do what the miners' fund had always been meant to do. She saw the injured cared for, and the widowed kept, and the orphaned schooled. And with the town's glad consent, she took a portion and rebuilt the one thing that had started it all, the crumbling schoolhouse at the edge of Alder Fork, her father's stone foundation sound after all beneath the rot, its roof made new, its bell rehung, its faded alphabet painted fresh and bright from A to Z. She rang that bell again herself on the first morning it reopened, an old woman with ink on her fingers, and the children came. And Alder Fork, which the company had all but written off as a dead town emptying toward the railhead, found in the restored fund and the restored school a a reason to stay and to grow, so that the very place two men had condemned became the place the town gathered itself around and did not die. They called her a fool, and they said it to her face when Marisol Vane laid her last $4 on the county clerk's desk for a ruin no one else would take. They did not know. How could they? How could she? That the mender's habit of never walking away from a broken thing, and the mason's faith that an honest foundation outlasts the men who forget it, and the reader's plain, patient love of the truth set down in ink, would together lift not one woman out of her poverty but a whole town out of its quiet robbery. She had lost her husband and her son and her work and her home, and stood at 53 with everything she owned in one bag. And it was precisely because she had been thrown away that she alone was willing to look twice at what everyone else had thrown away, and to find, beneath the floorboards of a condemned schoolhouse, the buried truth that gave a forgotten place its future back. That is what she did, Marisol Vane, and that is why we remember her. Not because she found a fortune, but because she gave it away to the very people who had laughed and taught them one last time the oldest lesson she knew, that nothing is ever truly finished until you have exhausted every way of saving it. Thank you for staying with us to the end of Marisol's story. It means more than you know that you gave this quiet tale your time tonight. If it moved you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that being overlooked is not the same as being worthless, and that the things a hurried world throws away are so often the very things worth saving. Before you go, we would love to hear from you, so tell us in the comments. What is a time in your own life when you found real value in something? A place, an object, a person, or even yourself that others had written off? We read every one, and we carry your stories with us into the next. Until next time, stay close.